I think we're live.
Here we are. Good to go again. Let's see, it's filling up already.
Got some early attendees. Wow. Okay.
Right. What have you watched on Netflix
guys.
this time, Lindell?
Welcome, guys. If you're dialing in, we are going to give we're about a minute before 12, and I think we'll probably start at 2 or 3 minutes past. But thanks for joining us for this session on DevOps. I am again your host, Dale, and I'll be joined by Phil and Darren, who are going to talk you through this very interesting topic today. But as I say, we'll give people a couple of minutes just to arrive before we kick off.
I heard the good old Netflix question there, Phil. I'm watching Power at the moment. I've got 5 episodes to go, so no spoilers, please.
I never got into it. My housemate used to be obsessed with it, to be honest. So I've seen most of the first 2 series just by proxy kind of thing, but no, I never really got into it.
It's really good. I tried watching because I was like you. I didn't really get into it until probably 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And I tried doing it all of it in one go. And by the time I got to the 5th season, I was completely burnt out. So I took a couple of months off just before watching the final season. But it's very, very good. Just very violent, so don't watch it with children, is what I would advise. Luckily, I don't have kids.
Yeah, it would be very, given I don't have kids, it would be very strange if I was watching.
Yeah, you suddenly had a child with you watching Power.
Yeah. So is this the final series then, is it?
Yeah, it's all finished now, so I can watch all the way through to the end.
Nice. Yeah, no, I might give it another go. We'll see. I'm still obsessed with Snowpiercer. The final 2 episodes came out yesterday, so I watched one of them. The 10th one.
That's next on my list, but I just feel like they're just going to rehash the film I've already seen. So,
in a way, but no, I think there's enough to it that it keeps you interested, and it's done slightly differently. They keep you guessing.
Nice.
But yeah, see.
Nice.
What time are we on?
1 minute past.
1 minute past, I think.
60 seconds.
Numbers picking up. So, guys, if you just dialed in, we are going to give people another minute or so just to dial in for this lunchtime session on DevOps. As I said earlier, I'm Dale, I'm going to be your host, and then Phil and Darren are erstwhile subject matter experts and heroes of the day are going to talk us through the content in a few moments.
In the 60 seconds while I wait, if people want to chuck in what they're watching on Netflix, I'll be very intrigued.
Recommendations on Netflix or questions about DevOps equally welcome at this point in the session.
I think I'm more comfortable in answering stuff on Netflix, but we're chucking DevOps stuff too.
Any suggestions come through?
No, everyone's gone quiet, so I think let's start the session before
we get an online riot on our hands. Okay, so guys, thank you for joining HackerJob team today to talk through the deconstruction of role briefs. And today we're going to be talking about DevOps, and Phil and Darren are going to take us through some of this content later or in a few moments. I'm going to get my cursor to work. Just a reminder, our Slack group is still live. So any questions that you don't get opportunity or think of during the session, feel free to ask Darren or Phil through our Slack group. You can get access to that by emailing hello@HackerJob. If you've got questions or comments, please use the all participants piece. And just a reminder, if you want to get updated invites to these Zoom sessions, we've got 2 more sessions in the next 2 weeks. Feel free to email hello@HackerJob again, and we get those updated links sent to you each week. And we've had very positive feedback, so don't forget you can go and watch back all the sessions on YouTube, and also tell your friends and colleagues and network. It's either on HackerJob, and our Twitter handle is @HackerJob_co. Or else give Darren or Phil some kudos over LinkedIn if you want to use the hashtags TRT or hashtag Tech Recruitment Training with 2 T's in the middle. That would be fantastic. So moving swiftly on, we are in week 4. So week 4 means we're going to talk about AWS and DevOps engineers. 2 more sessions, as I say, coming up. Automation engineers next week and AI engineers to wrap up the season. Looking forward to those very much. Today's agenda, I think I'm handing over to you, Darren. So talk us through what we're going to cover today.
Sure. So today we'll do a recap of DevOps. Obviously, we did a couple of sessions on the first season that were focused on DevOps of cloud. So I'll just recap some of that stuff. We'll do a deconstruction of tech, a little bit about skills. I'll also deconstruct experience of salary because it's really interesting looking at that from a DevOps side, as we'll go into in a couple of moments. DevOps is a very open for interpretation title. Or many titles, as you'll see in a bit. I should have taken off deconstruction of interview process. We did do that in session number 1 and 2. So for that stuff, feel free just to go to the last 10, 15 minutes of those sessions.
Yeah, maybe just important to stress that this is a deep dive into this subject matter. If any of this is a bit too complex, feel free to go back to some of our earlier sessions, which are all available on YouTube, as we mentioned a second ago. Cool, thanks, Darren. So, question of the day: what is DevOps?
Cool. So I had this debate with a guy called David Jamba, who works for Vodafone, a couple of weeks ago. We did a webinar together on DevOps, and I would tend to agree with what he said to me there. That I think the debate in the industry right now is DevOps a title or is it a cultural practice that you follow? So DevOps is obviously a combination, I'm sure most of you are aware of development and the operations side, bringing them together to create a automated environment to push the entire SDLC, so software development lifecycle, along and get into production quicker. So I tend to think that DevOps, to be honest, is a culture rather than an actual title, but I'm open to interpretation. And I think that the problem with DevOps a lot of time, as you'll see with some of the data later, is that DevOps can have so many different titles. So it goes from everything from the typical operations engineer and sysadmin person all the way through to more cloud engineering stuff now, which is DevOps focused, but it's much more focused on like development side of things. So big spectrum when it comes to DevOps. So what DevOps is kind of there to do is standardize development environments and automate delivery processes to make everything a little bit more predictable, improve the efficiency and quality and security. So from a security side, you'll see new titles coming into the market now as security becomes more and more important as we automate more, of stuff like DevSecOps. And I know that a lot of companies currently are hiring for that kind of stuff, which we won't spend too much time touching on today. I'm more than happy in the Slack group to have that debate.
Cool. And so the DevSecOps, I think, fits into our either unicorn or is it purple squirrel? I'm not quite sure what.
Either. I think we've been using.
Very hard to find candidates.
Yeah, very, very hard to find. I think that because you're essentially DevOps is very tough, and we'll get into numbers later because you're looking for someone with both development and operations experience or infrastructure experience. When you add sec into it as well, so security, they need to have experience across 3 different berths. And then you start getting into more of the like data science piece, where are you looking for the unicorn that has all these skills, or are you looking for an expert in one and has touched in the other 2?
Great. And so it sounds like we've got a bit of ambiguity about candidates or roles that are called DevOps and are maybe doing a variety of different things or flavors of pieces, or potentially candidates or roles that aren't labeled DevOps but are still doing DevOps-like things.
Exactly. Like we have in the past placed people that have been third line support, because that's essentially third line support is still working on a lot of these tasks. It just happened that that's what he was called in his business, but he got hired for, I believe he got hired for a lead platform engineer. I won't say where, but I believe it was a lead role that he actually got hired for. So the biggest tick I can give on DevOps is it's not like Java where you can just focus and go, I'm looking for Java engineers. You're looking for a mentality more than anything, an expertise and a mentality in something rather than just a job title, which makes it much more complicated to search for.
Yeah. And I think you've seen the rise of DevOps with the rise of kind of non-functional requirements as well. So as software developed from, okay, let's just get from A to B, to start thinking about, okay, how do we get from A to B in a more secure manner? How do we get from A to B in a quicker, more quickly? How do we get from A to B in a more predictable sense with less bugs and all of this sort of stuff? Like, I think we discussed in the first series that DevOps and testing, for example, are kind of two sides of the same coin, with testing focused on the quality and DevOps focused on the speed, but they're both also impacting the speed and the quality. Obviously, if you can, automate your testing process and have less bugs, in general, that is going to speed up your production. And in the same way, a lot of what DevOps does, having a strong DevOps culture does, is improve the quality of your software as well. Like, huge parts of the DevOps process are testing processes. I mean, all of your integration testing, BDD, things like that, they're essentially testing how does the new software interact with the existing software. So I think massively seen the increase in DevOps alongside the increase of non-functional requirements and that whole modern software engineering persona, which is why in the first session we did in TRT2, which was focused on that modern Java element, the DevOps tools were still very important to that modern Java skill set because they're sitting within that culture.
Yep.
Okay. So we might just move on to our next slide. So we may have touched on some of this already, Darren, but talk us through the origins of DevOps.
So essentially, DevOps came as an evolution of that agile culture, can't get my words out, which was originally preached because of continuous integrations and continuous delivery. So what we're looking at there is, and I'll move on to the next two sections in a second, is how can you make it more efficient so you can make changes to your business at a faster rate? So you look at people like, so this came via a guy called Patrick Dubois, who coined the DevOps term in 2009. And it was actually inspired by Flickr, who at that point were making 10 plus deployments per day. 10 plus deployments now is not a huge amount where I think that companies would say, wow, that is an incredible amount. But back in 2009, that was huge. And a lot of clients I work with now are looking at, okay, how can we put out 40 deployments a day? How can we put out 50 deployments a day? And then you look at companies like a Netflix or a Pinterest or a Twitter, that really those guys now are putting out deployments every few minutes, every hour or so, a new deployment is going out to fix something that has gone in. So it widely was adopted from 2014, but I think we've started to see the effects in the last 2 or 3 years of this model moving along.
Just had a question come through, Darren, which is actually quite a useful one, I think, to clarify now. So what do you mean specifically by deploy?
So by deploy, what I'm talking about there is an adjustment to what the application looks like. So a deploy is you put something into production and then it goes live. So a deploy from a Netflix perspective could be it could actually be as simple as a change to what is in their library. So deploying new, that's probably the best way I think to think of it. And I've never really put it into an analogy, but I guess putting something new into their library so that as a consumer, you can view it is a deploy.
Yeah, I think adding new features, like deploys can be anything, like you say, from as small as adding a new film on Netflix to deploying an entire new version of your website. Like a huge deploy obviously is going to have impact on all sorts of different parts of the site. For a small kind of daily deploy, you're probably just making minor tweaks, improving the speed of this one part of the system, or adding a new feature to another part of the system.
Yeah, and that's why you will see some companies deploy a lot more than another. It's not to say that because Netflix will deploy probably 100 to 200 times a day, I would assume, that they are quicker at getting stuff through than, I don't know, a Vodafone that we're looking to do it 30 times a day. It just depends on what you're deploying. So like a Vodafone deployment will be sizably more than what a Netflix one will be, but it's just that you don't need to deploy so many times a day because there's not as many changes to it that you need to make.
Cool, great question. Hopefully that answers things. So, and are we going to talk about this final example about Lego Nordstrom and Target?
Oh, we did touch on it.
Okay, great. Just checking we've ticked off all our bullet points. So moving on then. So I think you've touched on this a little bit already, but let's just clarify what all the benefits of DevOps are, Darren.
Sure. So I guess from a DevOps perspective, what you're looking to achieve when you're creating DevOps environment is rapid delivery. So improve the deployment frequency. So how many times a day can I make deployments that will change the way the application works? Speed. So speed is everything, as we all know in technology. So if you are working on a system where you're only deploying once or twice a week, then the likelihood is your competitor is doing something very similar to what you're doing. But if they're able to deploy it a lot quicker, as a consumer, and I'm seeing that they've made changes but you haven't, if that means that my experience is worse working with you than is your competitor, I will go with your competitor, because like customer experience is everything. So being able to achieve a faster way to market is huge. Reliability, so creating a system that lowers the failure rate of new releases. So again, from a customer perspective, if I'm using your e-commerce website and you aren't deploying very quick, so it means that there's a bug that's there and you're not fixing it for a day, I'm then going to your competitor. I'm not going to wait for you to fix that. Loyalty has kind of gone out the window, as we all know, over the last 10, 15 years. Very few people are going to be loyal to a company forever, unless they are like an Apple, where you may have a little bit more, but they are the rarity, I think. And even Apple don't tend to make many mistakes. And scale, so manage complex systems with reduced risk. So the majority of companies will still be trying to scale. If you look at the way that companies have grown over the last few years, there's still like an Oracle and an IBM and Microsoft that have been around at the top of the charts for a long time. But over the last 15 years or so, you'll see people like PayPal came along, eBay came along, Amazon came along. There's always new people. So as those new businesses come along, they need to be able to scale at very quick rates, which is what DevOps allows you to do.
Cool. So what we want to look at now is then sort of talk us through some of the technologies involved in a DevOps culture or DevOps role.
So this isn't a exhaustive list. This is more to give a bit of an idea about what systems are going to be used. So the likelihood is, because we're talking about AWS from this side, and I'll explain later why we focus on AWS. Actually, I'll explain now. So AWS holds over 2/3 of the market. So although everyone will know what is happening with Azure and what's happening with GCP, AWS has owned that market for a long time, and I'll go through the benefits of AWS a little bit later. I don't really have a horse in the race, if I'm honest. Like, I don't use the cloud systems, but we're explaining why certain people have used them. Azure tended to be very C# focused, and then GCP is kind of newer in the market. And as everyone will know with Google tried to be involved in everything. And I think you're seeing Google come along a little bit more, like you're seeing more companies adopt Google or GCP. But Amazon has got a big share in the market, so we focus on that from that side. So you'll probably have experience across the AWS ecosystem. So that's something like EC2, ELB, should I say. You'll probably have experience with a programming language or a scripting language, depending on how dev you are in the DevOps scale. So it's likely to be Python, Ruby, or Go. But you also see DevOps candidates with C#, for example. Node seems to be coming along. I've seen that there's a couple of companies that we work with at the moment want Node on their DevOps side. So any programming language you can think of is likely to be used in a DevOps capacity. An operating system, so that's going to be like a Linux or a Unix, or it might even be an AMS-focused operating system. Containerization tools, so a Docker or Kubernetes. And what we're talking about from a containerization perspective is a container is somewhere that you can put your information that is taken away from the actual application. So you can build on it and deploy it in isolation, so that you're not doing something that may break the entire system. So that's what a container basically is. It is, as the word implies. Databases, so they probably will have experience across stuff like Mongo, Postgres, MySQL, so both relational and non-relational databases, because of the fact that most companies now will have both, not just one in isolation. And then collaboration tools, so oftentimes you would have heard these being called more like project management tools, so stuff like Jira, Confluent, and Bitbucket. So this is where the code will be put, again in isolation, so that it can be utilized before going into production. Let's see, there's something in the chat.
Right, we've had some chats, so I don't know if we're about to answer this question, but why don't we tackle it now?
We come back to that. So I've just seen it myself. I think if we come back to that in a little while, it should be answered.
Great. Okay.
I think just to build on the programming languages element that you touched on there, again, it shows the kind of similarities between DevOps and testing and kind of automations. Like, the reason you can use almost any language is that you're using it for scripting. Scripting is basically just for automation of tasks. You're not building software with it. You're basically just improving internal flows and automating more. So that's why you'll see a lot of testers and a lot of DevOps engineers that will have a programming language, but they'll only use it for scripting and not necessarily able to build complex kind of software with it.
Great. Okay. So I think we might be able to answer our question if we do a bit of a deep dive more into the tools then.
Yeah, so we'll kind of get to it in a minute, but I guess this kind of builds again off of my original point, where the background wise, you will often see people come from either sysadmin or software engineering. You don't get people that graduate from university and oftentimes will move into a DevOps role. They'll likely come from an infrastructure sysadmin background, or they'll come from software engineering and then come into it. They don't come from both sides. They will come from one or the other.
Great. And that maybe also influences the sort of flavour of role and specialities that those candidates are going to have as well. Great. So we've touched upon AWS already. Give us some of the reasons why maybe it's so dominant in the market.
Yeah, sure. So from a perspective of why you would choose AWS is when you think about where AWS is based, they're not based down the road a lot of time. They'll be based in like Belfast, or they'll be based, they've got one in Santa Monica. They've got bases all over the world. Whereas the way that it used to happen, and I actually saw this in perfect example of this when I was in New Orleans at the start of the year. So the problem with how it used to work, where everything was there together, is a man-made disaster could completely take out your systems. So if it was in one location. So imagine a tornado. I don't know why I'd be a tornado in Belfast thinking about this, but imagine a tornado goes into Belfast, rips everything apart, and your systems go down. If you're working from one environment, or all your information is held in one cloud environment, that would take you down completely. So I saw this when I was in New Orleans about Hurricane Katrina. They held all their information in one building. Hurricane Katrina took it out, and they lost everything. They lost all records of death certificates in New Orleans, so they've had to build that back up. So AWS is in many different locations that isn't the case. Flexibility and scalability, from a perspective of how Amazon set it up, they set it up with an infrastructure of meeting the needs of the business. So you're not overbuying, and it kind of goes on to the next point of pay as you go, but you're not buying so much that you don't need to be using it. So you're buying based on what you actually need, and you can scale that as you have more requirements, rather than an old way of doing it would be you would buy a system, and regardless of how much you needed that system, that's what you would pay for it. When it's on premise, you'd buy server space, whereas now this is more scalable. It goes kind of up and down with the needs of the client. So it's good from how are you going to scale and how quickly can you build the tech, but also from a pay-as-you-go perspective, you're not overpaying for space you don't need or cloud you don't need, which for businesses, cloud is very, very expensive. So that kind of takes away that fear. So it's meant that the server farms you used to see in the centre of London have gone away to much of an extent. Sorry, I've not seen if we moved this slide because I started talking. No, if we move to the next slide.
Can move on? Yeah, great.
And then from
more reasons for AWS.
Yeah, so from a third-party API perspective, can never get API out. So what it does is it allows a lot more flexibility. So like I said with Azure earlier, Azure very much was C# focused. So unless you use C#, it meant you likely wouldn't use Azure. And I still think to some extent that is the case. Although with open source, that's meant that Microsoft have become more open, and it's meant that more companies are using Azure than before. But still the flexibility of AWS has meant that that's allowed companies that use Python, Ruby, Node, Go, Java, et cetera, to be able to use that system, which has given them a competitive advantage against their other rivals in the market. And again, global reach. So they've got it in 30 different zones. So it doesn't really matter where you are based in the world, you are still going to be able to get cloud. And the likelihood is you still will use a cloud system closer to you. It's more, my original point was more that if one of those systems went down, they could bounce you to somewhere else in the world, but the likelihood is that you will want a server that is, what would you say, Phil, like within a kind of 1,000 miles of where you're based is probably where you're looking at your kind of location be?
To be honest, I'm not entirely. I know the servers that they have in Northern Ireland, I think, service most of Europe. To be honest, so but I'm to be honest, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so but that's kind of why they based it in 30 or so locations. It means that no matter where you are in the world, you are covered in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's press on. Pitfalls to avoid then. What types of pitfalls are these, Darren?
Yeah, so from a pitfall perspective, what I'm talking about here is what are the pitfalls that you can fall into when building out a DevOps function. So I think that a lot of companies think they are somewhere in their DevOps journey, but really how you complete DevOps, if we're going to put it out to like the in-betweeners, analogy of I've completed this, when you've completed DevOps, everything will be automated. And very few companies are working in a completely automated way. So when I'm talking about automated, what I'm saying is that everything is set up from the deployment through to the testing, through to the security, so that a human doesn't really need to get involved at any point and everything can just go live. And very few companies are doing that. So from a pitfall perspective, what companies need to make sure is that partial org transformation isn't the case. So what I'm talking about here is that it's all well and good your DevOps team wanting to work in an automated way, but this needs to be supported not just in tech. This needs to be supported by like marketing, by sales, by operations, by your front end team, your back end team, your data science team. So everyone needs to be on this journey together. If you've just got one section of the business doing it, as with anything, it just won't work. You'll come into different areas of conflict. So you need to make sure everyone is on board with it. Incomplete test automation. So what I'm talking about here is that if you are working in an environment where you, for one reason or another, and it's likely because of a little bit of corporate laziness, if I'm honest, and you're working in an environment where you are still working with manual testing and you're not really automating most of your tests, it means that you're not really moving towards a DevOps way of thinking. You can't automate all tests, as you would have heard in different sessions, but the more you can move through into that way of thinking, the more you are going to be using a DevOps mindset. Toolset integration. So nowadays, this kind of builds off what I was going to say about HashiCorp. It's about choosing the right tools for what you're trying to do. There's very few tools nowadays that can't be used on different areas. I think as I keep going back to, was the exception to the rule before. So whether you're using Terraform, whether you're using Docker, whether you're using Kubernetes, whether you're using Jira, they all now integrate with each other, but it's about choosing the right tool for what you're trying to do, if that makes sense. And then the too much, too fast. So companies need to take a good approach on something. So, and five is going to kind of go against this, but you need to look at what is the outcomes of a decision you make. So if you're going to do something, know what are you trying to achieve, so you can say, okay, has this achieved the goal we're trying to do? Which then takes us on to 5 about being unwilling to fail. So again, going back to the conversation I had with David a couple of weeks ago, his mindset, and I really love this, was that it's fine to fail. It's about failing fast though. And on the previous point, knowing why you failed, because you can't really learn without failing. Failing is just a natural aspect of anything you'll do in life. But it's about understanding why you failed and building off that and creating a system that means that next time you do it, you won't fail. So it's really a TDD approach in a lot of ways. And then total product anarchy. So what I mean by this is that there's huge benefits to DevOps, but for everything in your system, it needs to be sped up by development. So you need to have like a Band-Aid system for it. So if you're going to do something, are you there to deal with the repercussions of it? Because there's going to be bits that are going to go wrong. So don't just assume that because the DevOps team want to do this, the dev team need to be there as well, so that if they make a decision, the dev team can also deal with the repercussions of it. So going again back to that partial org transformation where things all break down.
Cool. So a lot of parallels with the broader digital transformation process. It's a bit of a process.
Yeah, exactly. Like
subset of that broader cultural shift.
Yeah, it's all about the strategy that you're implementing. Like you need to have the right strategy to ensure success. Yeah,
my favourite Brad Pitt quote from I think the movie Moneyball is like, "It's a process. It's a process."
Yeah.
Right. Cheers, Darren. So we've now understood a bit more about that. We did have, I think, a little flash come up on the Q&A. If we,
so just on the Q&A side, I think it's a pretty easy one to answer. So will we be covering the pitfalls when recruiting DevOps candidates? I think that's literally what you're about to come on over the next 3 slides. So yes, we will be looking into that. And then just quickly on the HashiCorp Vault question, I think HashiCorp Vault, just to answer that specifically, I think is a security-focused DevOps tool. So I think it's when you're trying to control access to like passwords and API keys and things like that. So fits within what you were talking about right at the start, Darren, about DevOps being a culture and being focused on things like security and things like that. So not necessarily a tool you would need, but if your business needs are that, you do have a lot of secure information and that you are going to need to control access to it, then that's probably when you're looking at something like HashiCorp Vault.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that maybe I didn't cover that question as much as I thought I was going to in that case then. But I guess going back to a previous point, it's about choosing the right tool, like you say. So if you're looking at HashiCorp Vault, you are probably looking more of a DevOps focused candidate. So it's knowing what your focus is on within the business, because a lot of companies will have a security team that will take that away from it. But if you're looking at HashiCorp Vault, you're likely looking at more DevSecOps focused candidates in the main. So I guess, is there a compromise? So I think now as everything is moved more open source, that there's going to be some circumstances where you do need someone with that specific cloud, but to much of an extent, it's a little bit like frameworks within development. It's choosing the right candidate, not choosing that they've got the right cloud experience, because to much of an extent, a good candidate will be learning different skills as they go anyway. It might just be that they've not had access to that cloud before. So I would always look at the role, not look at the candidate, if that makes sense. So does this role require that someone is an absolute expert in AWS, or are you just looking for someone with the right cloud experience and AWS is a plus? Program language and scripting languages, again, how much of a difference will it make if they are using Ruby compared to they're using Python? And training up in different CI/CD, again, I guess I'm overemphasizing this here, but look for the right candidate. Like it's like development, where a good candidate will be able to train themselves quite easily. Good candidates will learn new skills every day. So it's about looking at the mindset of that candidate. How much are they learning in their own free time? Like how much ambition have they showed to learn new technology, because they are very adaptable in a lot of ways. And DevOps is moving forward at such a rate that something that maybe you're not even thinking about, they'll come into the business and say, look, have you looked at this tool? This is what I'm learning on the side. And it may push you in a completely different environment or a different direction.
Yeah. I think to touch on as well, the point on background within the cloud, like Kubernetes is probably, I'd say, the most in-demand skill on the market at the moment, probably the one that we're seeing talked about the most anyway. And Kubernetes works with Azure, AWS, or GCP. There's slightly different skin to it, and they work in very slightly different ways, but it's the same tool developed by the same company. So, it could be that actually 80 to 90% of the tools that you're working with are similar. It's just your cloud platform is different. So, like you said, it's about focus on what you actually need and what is it that's your blocker to hiring.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for long-time fans of tech recruitment training, you'll see it's a recurring theme of like either qualifying with a hiring manager or a hiring team. What are the must-have skill sets, and what's that trade-off between the length of time it's going to find the length of time it's going to take to find those unicorn candidates, if you like, versus maybe taking someone that's 80% there and allowing them to upskill in a relatively short period of time, possibly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. And so then we come to qualifying candidates through this process. Darren, do you want to talk us through some of the qualifying questions we might ask?
Sure. So AWS is a little bit different when it comes to like a Node or a Java. So there's not many versions of AWS. There's just iterations on top of it. So what I'd be looking for here is, I guess, versions of AWS, but also like what are they doing within that ecosystem? What have they used? And looking at the tools within it, because there's a lot of tools within AWS, and it depends on what they're doing with it. I think, Phil, you touched on it last week or the week before, where it's more about what are they doing with that tool rather than seeing, oh, they've got AWS on their CV, they must be right for this role. It depends on how in depth they're going, because I could touch on AWS, but I would not be able to be an AWS engineer. Tools wise, so what tools are they using? Are they how involved are they in CI/CD? Like how far are they along with that in their own companies and their own backgrounds? And then you can do a bit more of an assess of whether they be able to help you out. There's a client that I'm working with at the moment that are very early in their CI/CD journey. So what we're looking at for them is someone that has taken another company along that journey, because that's going to be important. It depends on where have they been before, so that you can look at where they can take you in the future. Agile, most people are looking to work in agile environments now, or have worked in one shape or form, but it's interesting to look at, have they worked in an agile background? And then databases, what databases have they worked with? My expectations, like I said earlier, would be that most would have worked with relational and non-relational databases, but to understand that probably means that you can have a better understanding of whether they're going to be right for you. So I think DevOps, as a kind of ending point on the technical qualification questions, you probably need to go a little bit deeper on your questions and not just assume based on what they put on their CV and also their title that they're going to be right, because it's much harder to do that in DevOps. You need to really understand what they've done with those tools.
Yeah, it's all about the responsibilities, and as we've said a few times, I think DevOps probably is because it's a culture and because it's very hard to find. There are a million different tools out there. Like, it's really, like, I think, you mentioned that wasn't an exhaustive list, and while it was the most popular tools, there are so many alternatives out there. So if you are just looking at keywords, you're going to miss out on a lot of great candidates unless you've got a huge list of synonyms of all of the tools that do the same thing. So really it is about digging into responsibilities and find out what people are doing. And as you touched on the cloud there, I don't know, I think it'd be very rare to find a developer, a DevOps engineer, tester, whoever it is, that doesn't have some sort of association with AWS or a cloud platform, just by the fact that they're working in a modern software engineering business. So again, it's what is their association with it, what's their relation with it, how often are they using, and what are they doing on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
So we think that there's not many companies that aren't somewhere along that AWS or cloud infrastructure journey, right?
I don't think we work with any companies that are purely on-premise still.
Well, if you are, then you're kind of going back to the days of having to send out a CD-ROM if you want people to update their systems. Like, I think we've definitely seen the move in the last 5-10 years to even companies that we would think of as a bit legacy will have some sort of cloud systems there, built into their infrastructure, I would say.
And just to demystify some of the acronyms we're using, I think most of our audience is probably familiar with SaaS as an acronym. What's IaaS?
IaaS is infrastructure as
a service.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what's the final word?
Almost caught you out on the.
You did. I should have known that straight off the top of my head, because Phil did. He did one on like PaaS, and what was the other ones for? There's some mental ones in there that you did.
I think people are using that quite ad hoc. The as a something.
Yeah, and it's worrying because we're a SaaS business, so how I struggle with as a service is worrying. Don't ever show this to Mark.
I'll let you, your secret is mine, Phil's, and all the people watching this on YouTube.
Yeah.
So are we getting close in now?
All I was going to say is infrastructure as a service is, I think, the most high-level version. So all you're doing is essentially renting an infrastructure, and then you've got a lot of flexibility of how you're using it. So AWS being the prime example, companies use that in a million different weird and wonderful ways. Whereas if you're looking at SaaS, software as a service, typically that software is already designed with a certain purpose in mind, and you're going to use it for maybe one or two different kind of outcomes.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think that it allows you to scale a lot more than kind of if you're using IaaS environment. It means that you can scale up as you go, because you're not always going to need the same amount of cloud. You might be doing a big deployment at the end of the month and going, okay, we're going to need a lot of AWS support on this. Whereas suddenly, once you're through that big deployment and that complete re-platforming of your application, it might mean that you go down. So that's why infrastructure as a service has become so popular. I think we can kind of go through the architecture and the cloud DevOps, because it's building on previous points. I think probably what is more interesting for the final 20 minutes or so will be looking at what their DevOps market looks like.
Cool. So we've got a few little summaries here, giving some insights into the marketplace. So talk us through this slide then, Darren.
Sure. So I think if you go back to January 2011, as mentioned earlier, DevOps really wasn't implemented until like 2014. So you'll start seeing that spike that happened just after Jan 2014. So over time, as with any market, it's kind of gone up and up. But within DevOps as a whole, because of the fact that there's so many skill sets within it, it's meant that the median hasn't gone up hugely. As you'll see, that it's, if you look from kind of July 2012 up to July 2020, there's been a increase, but not a huge increase. But the percentiles has changed a lot. So you're now looking at, in the market, I would say that if you're looking for a good, strong DevOps engineer, you can be talking anything from 70, and we've got clients that will pay up to 150 for a good DevOps engineer that is moving towards leading projects. So they're very, very expensive, DevOps engineers, compared to other areas.
I guess that spread also reflects just the growing number of candidates, professionals, and companies that are doing these types of roles now. Exactly,
like DevOps, compared to, and we'll move on to it in another slide in a minute. But DevOps, if you look at it compared to like back-end language developers, they aren't a dime a dozen. Like, they're very hard to find a good DevOps engineer that is going to be using cloud, is going to be programming languages, containerization, has worked within an infrastructure as a service environment, and everything along those lines. So that's why they are so expensive to get, because you are looking for a specialist in an area. Like, the likelihood is that you're looking for, as time goes on, DevSecOps will become more prevalent. So then you're looking for mastering 3 different subject areas.
I think as well, what you touched on earlier about the fact that you don't typically see grad DevOps roles. So you don't often see people going directly from university into a DevOps role. Typically, they'll, more often than not now, it's software development. Even the sysadmin background seems to be kind of fading out a little bit, because sysadmin typically are adding cloud skills to their game already. That means typically the people that are going into DevOps have already been a software developer or a sysadmin for 1 or 2 years. So that salary is probably already pushed up very slightly. So you're starting from a higher base.
Exactly.
Interesting. So I think you touched upon this, but I think this slide just really emphasizes the dominance of AWS.
So this is AWS Availability in the UK. So this doesn't look at the US, for example, where AWS is actually more prevalent. But AWS holds 63% of the market. Azure is almost 28%. Then GCP is at 9%. That's changed a lot over the last couple of years. So AWS is, I don't envisage AWS losing that majority stake in the market for a number of years, because they are continuously innovating. And you'll see that GCP or Google and Microsoft have their hands in other pies, whereas Amazon have gone all in on AWS in the last few years, but it's interesting to see that GCP is creeping up in other companies. So again, when speaking to your hiring managers, when speaking to your engineering managers, when speaking to your CTO, I think the most important thing to understand is why have they chosen one cloud system over another? Is it just that they've got a great deal with Amazon, or is it that there's something within the in the ecosystem with AWS that is why they chose it? And then that will allow you to then make decisions on when looking at candidates. Okay, so they've touched on, you're really interested because GCP offer this. Actually, this candidate has used this with AWS. Would you be interested because they've used a similar tool here? So yes, AWS holds the crown for being the major winner in this market, but over time, hopefully we see it even out, or at least companies be more open to candidates coming from different environments.
Yeah, and I think if you are a company that's using GCP, if you're really dogmatic about we only want candidates who have touched Google Cloud Platform before, well, you're looking at 9 in 100 candidates there. If you would be open to AWS as well, because they have Kubernetes, they have these other skills, they have other relevant tech to what you're doing, then suddenly you're looking at 72 out of 100. And what we see is a lot of companies are flexible. So if you're very rigid, well, that company that already has AWS, they're probably not that picky and they're already looking at the GCP candidates as well. So they're picking out of your talent pool. If you're not also picking out of theirs, then I think you're looking at quite a small segment of the market in terms of looking for those candidates.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Cool. And I guess there's also an underlying question: to what extent are those decisions about the provider of the cloud piece? Are they strategic decisions, or are they sort of year-on-year tactical decisions? So
exactly. Which, to be honest, I having spoken to a lot of like heads of in engineering perspective, unfortunately, a lot of time it does come down to just like pricing. But because that question isn't asked enough, it means that as a recruiter, and I'll put my ex-recruiter hat on for this. As a recruiter, you look at it and go, oh, okay, so we're an AWS house, so we must want people with AWS. Whereas you don't feel like, I don't feel like enough people ask the question of why have you chosen this, and what is within the other ecosystems that mean that you can offset this.
Interesting and fascinating market to see these three big tech giants actually all in the same ring.
Yeah,
doing it out with each other. So if we go on to look at some other insights on this, Darren, talk us through this slide.
So average salary being 62.5K, but again, I think that is driven down by the fact that there's certain skill sets. If you're looking for someone with all the bells and whistles, that would be significantly more, but that's what the average is. Bonus-wise, interestingly, the average bonus within the market, and this is taken by a pay scale, similar to how we've taken the rest of them, is about 5% of what the average salary is, which is quite surprising. Most of the clients we work with offer about 10%. Health benefits, I think we can kind of look away from that for a second, but what is really interesting, you get a lot of clients that say, oh, okay, we would like to have like 50% male versus female in our shortlists. As you can see from the graph there, that is near on impossible. So in terms of what is made up in that market, almost 96% of the engineers you'll speak to will be male. Don't ask me why that is the case. I'm not going to play that game, but but if you're looking for that to be a big thing, that's where you'll lose. I would love to, and I scream about this all the time when speaking to clients, I would love for more companies to put more into STEM and all these other areas where we can push this more towards a more even split, but that's kind of what it looks like in the market at the moment. From a skill set perspective, it's not massively surprising that cloud computing at 14% driving up your salary is a big thing. Ansible, from a Red Hat perspective, drives up your salary by 10%. Kubernetes 8%. Interesting, Microsoft Azure push it up by 6%. And then AWS at 5%. I think that to some extent that is a recognition of what is in the market. There's fewer candidates with Azure, so it means that when you are an Azure house, and that is a must for you, it drives up the price a little bit. And then Python being the scripting language that would you say it's fair to say, Phil, that that's the scripting language or programming language we see most with DevOps candidates? I would probably say so.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, if you want to listen back to the series 1, we go into a lot of depth as to why Python is the most commonly used language in the world. We've just seen Bash come through there as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with Bash either. I think Bash comes up a lot.
They're a popular scripting language, but I think part of the reason, sorry, Python is so popular is it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, there is a lot of people in the market that know Python, and therefore Python becomes a lot of companies' language of choice. But yeah, if you want to go back to TRT Series 1, we talk about why Python is the most widely used backend language in the world. And it partly is down to the fact that it's great for scripting and automating. It's also great for data intensive tasks within the big data world, and you can also build software with it. So it's really, really got a lot of kind of different use cases there. And then just to touch on the male-female point, I think DevOps is the, within DevOps is the perfect opportunity to try and have some positive impact on this. We've already discussed the fact that most DevOps engineers come from a software engineering background originally. Don't get me wrong, the stats aren't much better within software engineering. It's more 85 to 15, but that does still bring a lot more candidates into the marketplace. So if you are looking for a more junior DevOps candidate, I think definitely considering, and you do want to increase your diversity, then I think definitely considering, can we open up the role to junior software engineers, where there possibly are a few more women within the market, and as long as they've used a bit of cloud, can we then take the time to upskill them and turn them into DevOps engineers, which, if you're getting talented software engineers, wouldn't necessarily be an issue, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it in a couple of clients at the moment, where they are realizing that, look, they're looking at a more junior end of the spectrum, where in reality there's not a huge amount of junior DevOps engineers, as we kind of touched on. So you'll see people upskilling candidates. So, okay, we'll look at a junior software engineer that is going to move into a DevOps role, and we've seen that across a major London-based consultancy, and we've also seen that across probably one of the biggest cloud providers in the world.
Yeah. Cool. And then we've had a question come through in the chat as well, relating to kind of production. So is there a major difference in experience in someone who's responsible for running a production workload as opposed to someone more on the cloud architecture side? And I think, again, it comes into those myriad titles. So yes, you have cloud architect as a title. You also have cloud engineer as a title, and typically they are more involved with setting up your initial infrastructure, setting up how the overall system is going to work. That's not to say they won't then be involved in what you would consider more of a traditional DevOps engineer responsibility, which is actually running that production environment, running the production workload, pushing things, pushing deploys live into the system. I think we've seen cloud engineers that are very much involved in the production and delivery side, and we've seen DevOps engineers that have also been heavily involved in the actually setting up that initial infrastructure. So it comes down again to what Darren was saying about not looking at job titles, not looking at just the tools, actually looking at the responsibilities, because there absolutely are candidates that have done both of these, and there are absolutely candidates that have done only one or the other, but there isn't a kind of set in stone way to define either of these in a simple sense of saying, yes, this is what a cloud architect does or a cloud engineer does, and this is what, I don't know, an SRE or a DevOps engineer does. SRE is just a whole different world again.
Yeah, and like I kind of building on your point, it's if you're looking for like cloud architecture, it's like, okay, how have you been involved in building cloud architecture before and setting up cloud architecture? Or if you're looking for, because that's what it's going to come down to. I think platform engineers, site reliability, and cloud engineers, if you see on it tends to be a little bit more defined. Whereas if you see other titles on it, it sometimes comes down to it. So it's asking, what are they doing with those tools? Like, how have you used those tools before? And you're going to quite quickly find out how involved they've been, because they're going to be able to give examples just off the top of their head of, okay, I was involved in this. And it means that you can make a more thorough decision. don't just, and that's what sometimes when I look at so I don't look at profiles that often, but if I just see a profile and all they mention is AWS in terms of their responsibilities, for me, that shows a bit of that potentially there's a shallow understanding of it, because they haven't mentioned the tools that are within that ecosystem. I think when I looked the other day, there was something like 45 tools that are currently like modern, being used in a modern AWS environment. So there's a lot of tools in there, and the likelihood is that as an engineer, you're probably using a subset of those tools. You're not using all of them at any given time. So it's like, what tools are you using within that environment? Because if we look at like the Microsoft suite, you've got Office, you've got Word, I'm giving this Excel, you've got PowerPoint. But if you just put Office suite, okay, what are you doing with that? Which one are you using? Like, which tool is what you're using on a day-to-day basis? Because then it gives you a bit more of an understanding of where is their specialization.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. I think that might be the end. I think we've actually got through this one a lot quicker than other ones. So if there's any more questions, feel free to shoot them in.
I think we've had a few more questions come through on the chat, or comments at least. Have we addressed all of those?
That's what we've just gone through.
Cool. Yeah, so gone through those. Yeah, I think we discussed Bash very briefly, obviously being another popular scripting language, and then yeah, that those pitfalls, I think, with job titles. But yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is that a DevOps engineer is a very broad title. Some companies have taken the decision to divide that up into different disciplines within it. A site reliability engineer kind of does what it says on the tin. They're responsible for your site being reliable and not crashing when you're kind of deploying new features. Some companies have called some of their DevOps team cloud engineers, who kind of take responsibility for that initial part, that setting up the infrastructure. But most companies, to be honest, are just kind of grouping all of those responsibilities under a generalist term of DevOps engineer, and they wear quite a lot of hats within that role.
Cool, great. So maybe give people a few moments if they just want to add any more questions or comments, but otherwise I think we can probably wrap there, guys, a little bit before time. So pithy and to the point on DevOps this week.
I must say, I really, and I've sent him a message to say out. Quite like when Tom called us out on the Bash day. It's not very often that someone will call us out on what we say. So I think fair play on that side.
More of that.
There's a bonus.
Yeah, I know, we need more of that.
Your way, Tom. Great. Well, guys, thanks very much for your insights today, and thanks to everyone who's dialed in to watch us. This will be available on all the usual channels, and feel free to follow up on Slack and shout about us on Twitter and LinkedIn as you see fit. And we'll see you again this time next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.